doing a sport is really fundamental while you're in school, and I think it's really important that you start one while you're in primary school.
I think it obviously just comes down to the way that children and young adults and people with less responsibility act, and the time that they have and the skills that they need to build up. I think it's just a really important part of, growing up and childhood and, learning.
Welcome to Ceyflix TV Ceypod Live Next Gen podcast, where we talk about all things that happen in school and in the world and how it can affect teenagers. So today we're going to be talking about why should one do a sport while they're in school?
Yeah, so I've seen a couple things, and you've obviously seen a couple things about why is it that more people do sports in school than after. So today we're going to be touching on that and why we think that happens. So what's your basic understanding of this?
I think doing a sport is really fundamental while you're in school, and I think it's really important that you start one while you're in primary school. And I'm not saying you have to necessarily stick to the same sport the whole way through, but I think it's important to stay involved in a sport though, because it's not just for fitness. While that is, I guess, a big contributor of it, you're able to, I guess, lengthen your life expectancy. But other external factors are, it's really good for your mental health. We've touched on that in a previous podcast. It just builds life skills in terms of, if you're playing a team sport like soccer, cricket, AFL, you develop those communication, collaboration skills to work with other people, to have that emotional capacity to understand how someone's feeling in a game, and obviously take that into other contexts outside. And so you build so many different skills, and it's not just about playing that sport, it's like the benefits you get from playing it.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really important to play one.
Yeah, so I think that's a really interesting point, obviously, about the skills that are taught at a young age through sports, like communication, teamwork, whatever. But there's also the other factor of time. I was having a really interesting conversation with someone about, why is it that adults, they just don't seem to have time for anything, and why kids, they just make time. So I think there's other factors that come into it. Some, things like freedom, you don't have as much responsibility, some could say. But yeah, so obviously it's really important to have sports in school. So do you think that same reason is sort of like why languages are important in school as well? Because when you think about it, it's not a necessity. But why do you think it's really good to have those sort of skills?
Yeah, it's quite literally, again, you build those transferable skills. It just means that I've heard that learning a language just makes you, I guess, more reactive to things. Like, you're able to think on the spot, make those quick decisions, analyze situations more clearly, pick up on small things. But it's also just learning a language is a new skill. It's a pretty cool skill to have. It comes really handy when you're traveling. If you learn a quite, I guess, globally recognized, while there's tens and thousands of languages in the world, if you learn quite a popular one like French, Spanish, Chinese, those languages are not just used in like the country they're kind of named after, you could say. They're used in so many different countries. So when you're traveling, it comes really useful. Like, you have that skill that you can use to communicate with people in those countries. So you're not relying on Google Translate or other people there that you're paying money for. Like, I'm not saying it's a bad thing to pay money for someone to translate for you. Like, that's a cool job in a way. But it's also having that independency, I guess, is like the important part. Same thing, it's not just when traveling. It opens up new opportunities and horizons to go work overseas, to go study overseas. because obviously that's not something accessible to everyone. But if you have the opportunity and you're learning, let's say, French in school, like my school, they did French exchanges. So we had like a sister school over in France, and doing that exchange meant that we were able to go experience their culture, but also learn something new. Put the skills we're using, learning in school to use overseas. Because realistically, unless you have friends or family or like somebody you know that speaks that language outside of school, you're not going to be able to really practice it, right? And so being able to go overseas and practice that, whether that's in a working capacity or in a travelling capacity, that's a pretty cool skill to have.
Yeah. So I think, thinking quick and stuff, like you said, that's obviously comes from both languages and sports. So what about, more social aspects of sports when you're in school, building up sort of obviously teamwork, and just social skills that you're going to use when you get older, and, even that you're going to use when you apply for a job and when you apply for uni. So how do you think that those two correlate?
Yeah, so I guess kind of going back to that sport context, because in a language context you probably are not doing so much group work in a way, but in a sport, in a team environment, especially if you're playing one of those team sports of the many available, you, going back to that point I said about emotional capacity, you learn how to react to people's emotions, control your own emotions, and then deal with it.
Yeah.
And that's not just important in a game setting, because it could be at where you need a goal to win or X amount of runs to win. And it's really coming down to, I guess, how your team reacts, works together really well. And that's not just in a sporting context, in a working context. If there's a deadline to meet, how can you all work together? Identifying each other's strengths, like in a cricket match, for example, because we both play cricket, you wouldn't toss the ball to your opening batsman.
Yeah.
To bowl the final over where you need to defend 3 runs, let's say, right? Unless they are your opening bowler, different story. Great job for being able to do both. But you're not going to realistically, I guess, sort of a keeper is probably the better thing. The keeper doesn't bowl.
Yeah.
So it's being able to, I guess, recognize each other's strengths and be like, okay, this is how we can use that and put it into a working context. Because in sports, obviously you develop, I guess, a liking to a certain aspect of that sport, whether that be bowling, batting in like a cricket context. But also sometimes you find hidden discoveries like, oh, I can actually do this skill in the sport that I didn't think I was capable of. And potentially a teammate, a captain, a coach recognize that in you. Right? So it's being able to like just recognize those hidden things as well. So if you're working in a group, whether that's been like a university group for work, a group assignment, even in school, like you're able to pick up on those small things. Notice those hidden details which help, I guess, later on in life. But yeah, that's what I think about it.
Yeah, so those leadership skills will obviously have a huge impact later on. So that's team sports. So what about, more solitary sports, singles tennis, and sports that you don't really do it in team. So how do you think that positively impacts your future?
Yeah, so although, let's say like singles tennis, badminton, swimming even, all of those are more or less quite individual sports, but although they would be labelled as being individual sports, realistically there's a team behind you.
Yeah.
You've got your family supporting you, friends, your coaches, even though you swim, taking like Olympic teams for example, like recently at the Winter Olympics, the figure skating team, there's pairs figure skating, also the individual men's and women's figure skating. However, despite them all having that individual aspect on it, they work together to do a routine that won them the team gold in that sport.
Yeah.
And so it's just being able to, I guess, be independent. I guess that team sport really builds that independency, agency in you to reach out, to react to things. But it also helps you go, okay, so this is what I'm good at, this is what I can do to help a group.
Okay.
And it's being able to be independent and depend on others even in a way, or say, you can depend on me because I've got this skill.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter if you're playing a individual sport or like a team sport. I think you learn more or less the same skills. It just comes in a different capacity, where in a team sport you might be interacting with people more your age if you're playing like aged division sport, or it could be that you're interacting with all sorts of people aging from like however old your coach is, your parents, friends, whoever surrounds you. I think you pretty much learn the same skills in both places, which definitely positively impact you later on in life.
Yeah. So yeah, obviously, so that means both, sports, so sport types, both solitary and team sports, they both have different sets of skills that you learn. So in a just completely working context, and just only a working context, how do you think those skills can translate into, skills that you can really use to perform different sort of jobs?
Yeah, so I guess the main transferable skills that you learn from anything is being able to communicate, to work together in a group. Because although at work you might be the only person doing your job, you may be the supervisor of something, but realistically you've got to realise you are working with other people. So it's being able to, if you need to delegate tasks, finding those hidden strengths, giving them, okay, I think you're really good at replying to emails, so I'm going to put you on doing the emails. Or I think you're really good at talking to the customer of whatever product you're selling, so I'm going to put you here. You look like you have a friendly smile, face, you're able to interact with others really good, I'm going to make you work here. You learn that kind of things from playing that sport. You take those skills, and then in a job, or it could be that independence that you get from playing a solitary sport. It's being, okay, I'm really good at this, I'm going to put my hand up and say, I will do this in this context.
Yeah.
And then you're able to then contribute positively into that working environment.
Yeah, so that's obviously a really good point as well that you made there about, how you can sort of just section people into, the skills that they're good at, and how that can obviously translate into doing certain jobs and tasks. So overall, so obviously the question is, why do people, in school, and why do children and young adults play sports? Obviously it's very popular. So I think it obviously just comes down to the way that children and young adults and people with less responsibility act, and the time that they have, and the skills that they need to build up. I think it's just a really important part of, growing up and childhood and, learning. And that whole process itself is something that will be used later on in life and will teach a lot of things. So is there any stories that you can think of personally where, your cricket skills or other sports that you've done have translated into, a working context?
Yeah, definitely I've been quite fortunate enough to have like leadership positions in quite a few of the teams I've played in. And that's come quite, I guess, useful. The skills have been from able to lead, to being able to delegate tasks. That's really come really useful both in a working context and even in like a university context, where I've been able to take those skills and lead project groups. Especially when I did like my diploma in sports management, I was able to take on that team leader responsibility and ensure that we met deadlines, did work to the best of our ability. And even in a working context, it's being able to go, I can do this, or actually, hold on, you've assigned this to me, I don't think this is quite in my capacity to do this.
Yeah.
Like, I can do it, but I don't think it'll be done to the level you're maybe expecting it to be, or it can be done to. So I'm going to put my hand up, be responsible for it, and say, I'm not equipped enough to do this.
Yeah.
And in sports, sometimes you got to go, no, I don't think I can do that. And it's being able to accept that, and go, even in a working context, go, no, sorry, this is not within my capabilities. I think so and so will be better at it.
Yeah.
That's what I found quite useful, is that I've been able to go, I don't need to deal with everything. I can share it, reach out to others, and building those communication skills, because playing sport, being a leader, a captain in a team, means sometimes you have to have difficult conversations with people and say, I'm really sorry, normally you would bat here, but this is kind of a do or die match and we need to send out our strong batters to win this game.
Yeah.
And same thing at work, being like, oh, actually, I don't think this is the best way we could go about this. How about we do this instead?
Yeah.
It's being able to be constructive in it and not jump to criticising. Learning the fine balance between them, how to give feedback, how to receive feedback. That's the kind of things that I think I've learned from playing sport into a working context.
Yeah, so obviously you've had a lot of time to develop those sort of communication skills and the leadership skills that you're talking about. And I guess lots and lots of people do start playing sports from really young ages. And hey, that can also turn into like hobbies, you know. Obviously we started playing cricket when we were really young and we really enjoyed it, and most people that play sports from childhood, if they love the game, then obviously they're going to continue. So there's obviously that aspect of, just having something else to focus on instead of just, school, just work. So those sort of hobbies and those sort of skills are also going to be really useful later on in life, so that you have different things to do, and you have you let your personality grow a little, and if it means you go outside your comfort zone at an early age, that's that. So those sort of skills will obviously be really helpful. But do you think outside of leadership and communication, do you think there's any other skills, for an example, thinking on the spot, and things like just being able to react differently due to in different situations, and things like taking on pressure? Do you think that there's those sort of skills that can also be really helpful later on in life?
Yeah, absolutely. But just quickly touching on your point of sport being turned into a hobby for some past schooling, or even during schooling, I would say it's a positive distraction. Like, yes, you're, I guess, not thinking about school or work actively, but I think it's a positive distraction that helps in the long run, because you're not so single-mindedly focused on something. But in terms of anything else that I've learned in terms of quick decision making, handling pressure, definitely there's so many pressure points in playing sport. Like, it comes down to however the next few minutes of a game goes is going to determine the match result, maybe your season result altogether. And sometimes to deal with the pressure, you just got to block out the outside noise.
Yeah.
And it's easier said than done. Personally, I find it works fine for me. I automatically do it. It's worked well. But it's also sometimes just going, if someone's trying to offer you advice from the other side of the pitch, sometimes you just got to go, no, I don't want that information overload. It's being able to be brave enough, strong enough to go, not now.
Yeah.
I've got this, done it so far in the season, we'll be fine.
Yeah.
And you can definitely apply that in like a working context, going, oh, you've got a deadline to meet. How about you do this instead to help you meet the deadline quicker?
Yeah.
Like, use AI to write the rest of your report or something.
Yeah.
Let's go, no, I've got this. Yes, I've got an hour to write the next 500 words, for example, in some report you're writing for work. It's no, I can get through this by that time point. Just building those like independency skills and trusting your ability. But another really important aspect of sport, or just doing anything else really, is being able to make like lifelong friends.
Yeah.
I can definitely say from my point of view, I've made lifelong friends from playing sport. Met them when I was 12, 13 years old. 7 years later, I'm still friends with them. And it's not because I see them every day, but it's because I built those connections, relationships with them, and they've just always been there. Even if it's in the background, they've always kind of been there. And so you build those lifelong friendships,
Yeah.
which again help later on in life. I'm sure you have.
Yeah, that's also really relatable, not just to us, but obviously, pretty much I would think everyone that plays sports, those sort of connections and that sort of networking does help. And we are running low on time, but really quick, just to touch back on the, positive distractions, it that's obviously a really good thing, and it, prevents things like burnout, helps with mental health. There's a billion different ways that positively impacts you, which will then impact your schooling, your education, how you work. So yeah, overall, I think that, you know, the skills that you learn, and just if you play a sport, you don't have to be, the greatest of all time at it. Just by playing a sport, you know, how that can be transferred into, your working environment, your schooling environment, and how that overall betters your life. So we have run out of time for today's episode. So, we talked about, the skills that can be taught from a young age by playing sports, and how that can be transferred into, other contexts like schooling and jobs. And we've also discussed, the lifelong friendships and networking that playing sports can have. So that's it for today's episode. Join us next time on Ceypod Next Gen.